The Alliance for Charitable Reform is a project of the Philanthropy Roundtable that educates legislators and policymakers about the central role of private giving in American life and the importance of protecting philanthropic freedom.
I'm Marcus Chavez, Communications Director for the Alliance for Charitable Reform. Today I'm joined by Howard Husock, Vice President for Policy Research at the Manhattan Institute. Mr. Husock, thanks for taking a few minutes of your time to discuss these issues.
My pleasure, Marcus.
So it's obvious to tell we're here at the offices of the American Enterprise Institute because AEI released its study today on charitable giving. You actually just participated in a panel on that study. I was wondering if I can get a few of your thoughts on it, including the finding that a cap on the charitable deduction could cost over $9 billion in charitable giving.
Well, thank you for having me, Marcus. And as you know, my duties at the Manhattan Institute include heading our philanthropy and social entrepreneurship initiative, civil society focused. And I write a column for Forbes called Philanthropy and Society. So I guess that's some kind of a qualification to answer your important question, and I'll try. We can discuss, is it $9 billion, is it $5 billion, but there's no doubt that the White House proposal to cap the value of the charitable deduction at 28% of the donation, even as the top marginal income tax rate has risen to 39.6%, will diminish charitable giving. And I think the shocking thing about that is the relative indifference of the White House to that effect. Treasury Secretary Lew in his confirmation hearing said, well, there would be a minimal effect, a few $1 billion perhaps. And one just has to question, why is that not considered to be centrally important? Our total charitable giving in this country between individuals, households, corporations, and foundations totals only, it's more generous than any other country in the world, but it still totals only $300 billion. Why not take as a given that any tax reform proposal, whether it's from the White House or from the lawmakers in Congress who are considering it, keep charitable giving at least constant?
In a pamphlet that you published earlier this year called Philanthropy Under Fire, you wrote, "The charitable tax deduction can be viewed as a general expression of approval for civil society overall and for a free and decentralized approach to discussing and doing something about social problems." Could you further explain or expand on that statement?
Well, I think of it as kind of a national venture fund, if you will. The mistake is to say, well, this is fund. These are funds that are given back to individuals from the government. It's a so-called tax expenditure that properly belongs with the government. To believe that, you have to believe, first and foremost, that the government would do better things with it. Well, the government has a lot of important tasks, but that's not a lot of money, and the imagination and creativity and the minority views, to your question, the minority views that are associated with individual charitable giving need to be nurtured, because you know what? Some of those might pay off in important new approaches to social problems, or even just serve as safety valves for dissent, and that's important too.
You know, you talk about the minority views. You've also written that that an independent philanthropy is actually a model or an example of our democratic process because it takes into account the views of everybody and everyone can give to whatever organization that they want. Could you talk a little bit more about how philanthropy mirrors the democratic process?
Well, you know, of course, we know that Mr. Madison wrote about the tyranny of the majority, and charitable giving is an outlet for an incredible array of views. You know, I mean, I have a lot of favorite examples, but my current favorite example is Peter Thiel of PayPal. He's got a foundation. Nobody talks about him as much as Bill Gates. Bill Gates is partnering with governments around the world and he's doing some important things. Peter Thiel is doing kind of idiosyncratic things that a lot of people, when he first started doing them, might have disapproved of, urging people not to go to college. That's just the perfect example of what we're talking about, Marcus. We had such a consensus for such a long time, going to college is what everybody should do. And Peter Thiel comes along and he says, you know what, there may be entrepreneurs, imaginative people who are better off not within the strictures of higher education. And his view has started a kind of a soul searching about going to college overall. Maybe we should revive career and technical education. Maybe we need a flowering of different avenues. I submit that Peter Thiel's kind of slightly offbeat philanthropy set in motion a national democratic discussion.
there's perhaps a growing belief or growing movement that there's a hierarchy of charities, that some charities, their causes are deemed more worthy or more credible because they deal with, say, specifically the social services as opposed to maybe a museum or the arts. Could you talk about that, and are there any dangers or flaws to that type of philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable when times are hard and food pantries might be running out of goods and lines are long. It's understandable that those who are concerned about those problems think that charitable giving ought to be devoted to immediate needs. But the history of charitable giving in this country has been one of long-term ideas. So, when John D. Rockefeller started the University of Chicago, nobody was saying, "Oh boy, we need one more university in this country." And imagine the want, the hunger that could be found within a 5-mile radius of the Midway in south side of Chicago at that time. But we know that over time, the University of Chicago developed so many great ideas and thoughts that have had practical applications that have led to greater prosperity. And so do we know for sure that no young person will be inspired by a visit to a museum and do something that will have effects beneficial and unimagined down the road? I don't want to say that. And not only that, but to me, the history of our civilization, understanding where we come from, that has value. If we get to the point where we are utterly and crassly utilitarian about all our charitable giving, well, that's a diminution of the humanities, so much under fire these days, and of the traditions of our society.
All right. We've talked a little bit about perhaps the role of government in philanthropy, but I'm interested to know, is there a specific balance between independent philanthropy and the role of government and how they work together, and how do we either attain that balance or continue that balance between the two?
Well, there's a lot of talk. The president has started something called the Social Innovation Fund, and the avowed purpose of that is to create partnerships between major foundations, primarily major philanthropies, and public funding to seed new programs. The danger with that is that the priorities will become politicized, that they'll be narrowed, that imagination that I've been talking about is going to be constrained. Now, it's up to individual philanthropies. That's part of the freedom we have, if they want to partner with the government. But over the last many years, certainly since the early 60s, a lot of philanthropy has labored under the idea that we'll start a pilot program and then government will take it over. I think we have to get back to an earlier American tradition, is that one starts a local program and then other local champions around the country pick that up. And it spreads that way without the bureaucracy and administrative overhead and inefficiency that we've seen government bring to scaled up programs like Head Start. I wish there were 500 local Head Start programs with their local boards of directors and local fundraising and staffed by idealistic people who volunteered to help that. And I think it would be a more effective program.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking a few minutes with us, and definitely have a further conversation in the future.
Well, thanks for what you guys are doing at the Alliance for Charitable Reform.
If you would like to learn more, you can visit our website at acreform.com. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Alliance for Charitable Reform, and we're also on Twitter. Our handle is @acreform.